come. Here they come. Good to see you all coming in. Oh, this is one of my favourite parts of every webinar I do, everyone, just before I do any introduction. I just love it when you press the start broadcast button and then you just sit back and it's like actually being in a room and people slowly make their way in and I get to watch the attendee numbers click up. So it's fantastic to have you here. We had 160 odd people, I think, in the end who registered for today. And again, we had people who came along from different parts of the world, certainly different parts of Australia where we're located. So I'm just doing my scroll through now to see what names I recognise in the list there. There's a few that I'm familiar with there. Tina Akers is here. That's one I know. Nicole Henry, fantastic. All right, Karen Chasten's here as well. Good to see you, Karen. Well, I can't see you, but you know what I mean. All right, so we might make a move. Here today to have a chat about school culture. Sure, yeah, hoping that you get a bit out of today, hoping that you pick up a few little bits and pieces. But what I want to do first is put you in the right state of mind, you in the right position to be able to get yourself into something as nebulous, as tricky as school culture, something that people tell me sometimes is a little bit like trying to nail jelly to a tree. So what I need to do is to put you in a position where you're best positioned to learn for today. And sometimes you come today and you've got an idea of what you're doing here. And it might be something along the lines of, I just want to find out a few things about school culture. It seems an interesting topic. Try and pick up a few tips and strategies from Adam. Okay, no worries, I get that. I also get that a good friend of mine, a fellow called Peter Bain, said to me once, and Peter's a wonderful Australian who runs a charity called Hands Across the Water, and they build orphanages in Thailand. And he says when he rings, there's sort of this cultural thing that gets in the way where he has to ask 3 times what people want, what people need. Because otherwise we just get platitudes. We get, no, I'm fine, everything's good. But it's not until you go a little further. And I tried this out one day, this idea of asking 3 times, when I ran a day of training back in the old days when Victorians like me could run a workshop and have people come to a room and talk about something. There was a principal there in the room. And I asked him, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm just here, find out a little bit about behaviour. It was a workshop about leading whole school behaviour improvement. Go back to my school with a couple of bits and pieces. Then I asked him again, the second question, I said, but what are you really doing here? And he said, my school's a bit of a mess. He said, I'm new to the school and, it's been gone through a bit of a crisis and, got some staff members who aren't getting along, got some new staff members and there's no real culture formed and I just thought this was not a bad place to be. And I said, what are you really doing here? And he looked at me, and if I may speak plainly, people who are in Australia know that I tend to speak plainly about these things and I won't corrupt the memory of this story by not telling you the truth. And he looked me in the eye and he said, I don't have a fucking clue what to do about it. There you go. That's what he's doing here. Can I ask you to stop for just a moment before we go any further and question whether the reason you came today is really the reason that you're here? I've got a funny feeling that you might have a deeper reason for getting involved today. School culture is one of those issues, and as the people who know me know, I often say is that when I ask people do they think culture is important, they all say yes, and when I ask them what it is, they all start to talk like Dennis Denuto, the lawyer from the great Australian movie The Castle, who says it's a vibe and an atmosphere, a feel, or whatever. It's the Constitution, it's Mabo. Don't really know what we're talking about. So what we want to do today, and just to, I guess, get to the point about why we're here today, is to talk about school culture, about defining what school culture is. Let's see if I can get this slide to change. There we go. We're going to define what we're talking about when we mean that we want to actually work on school culture. And then we're going to get into the art and the act of what it means to lead it, to actually do something about culture, to know what those first steps are that we need to take. And so that's why we're here. Now, what do I consider school culture to be the 2021 frontier? I believe that if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that context is everything. It's that we adjust our behaviour, we adjust our conduct according to the place that we're in. All of us adjust our behaviour when we are in the home learning environment. You know, when we're learning here, our teachers have had to adjust their behaviour to cater for students who are sitting at home. And we certainly have adjusted our behaviour to being remotely positioned. If you're a Victorian educator, then you're going to be, at the moment, probably working from a home office. If you're somewhere else, you might be able to work from school. We might be in some sort of combination or hybrid situation, depending on where you are in Australia, all the way around the world. But there's a universal truth here, and that is that we have adjusted our behaviour for an environment that allows us to only see the top half of ourselves. Forgive me. I will come clean that yes, I am doing that thing where I am at the desk and I'm wearing my suit jacket and my shirt, my tracksuit pants and my runners. We have all adjusted our behaviour for the environment that we have positioned ourselves in. Now I need to reposition myself back in that environment. Teachers told me this when they had sometimes, whether it was a first or a second round of remote learning and students returned, and they said that some of the habits had been lost, but they came back very quickly once the classroom environment had been re-established. We change our behaviour when we walk into, for instance, a rock concert, or when we go to a place of worship, or when we are in a staff meeting, or when we meet with the supervisor. We certainly adjust our behaviour. So if we're looking for behavioural adjustments, and I want to put to you very shortly that when we're defining school culture, that's what we're working on. When we're talking about improving culture, what we have to do is say, what sort of culture could we build such that when people walk into it, they just can't help but start to behave a certain way? Because there's a whole bunch of behaviours going on around them that are completely normalised. So for instance, when we are in the environment of, say, at a rock concert, all of a sudden it feels normal to start yelling or to, begin getting a bit of crowd surfing or whatever it is that turns you on. All of a sudden that stuff becomes normal because everyone else around you is doing it. If I went to a rock concert and everybody was jumping around crowd surfing, but there was a small sign by the side of the stage that said, please don't crowd surf, would that stop me from crowd surfing? I don't think it would. If I went to a rock concert and on the way in, there was a sign that says, please only drink three drinks of alcohol tonight and try not to dance too loud in such a way that the people behind you are disturbed. Would I do it? I don't think I would. In fact, even on the way in, if I was explicitly told by a security guard, you are in a no singing along section at this concert. You are not permitted to sing along. And I could walk away and he might say to me, I've explicitly taught that person not to sing along with the Foo Fighters on the stage. I don't think so. Not when my favourite song, The Pretender, comes along. I am singing that song with them. So you can explicitly teach, you can put signs up, you can have artefacts all around the place for the things that you really want people to do. But unless it's been culturally normalised, the temptation's too big. It's too hard to resist. And so that's why we want to focus on culture. Let me tell you a working definition of culture. I believe that culture is a behavioural total. So what I mean by that is that it's a big ball of all of the behaviours that are demonstrated by the three cultural stakeholders in your school: your staff, your students, and the parent and carer community. Put them all together, everything that everyone does, that's your culture. I believe that within that culture, there are two subsets of behaviours. There are the behaviours that we encourage and the behaviours that we tolerate. That's it. So they're the behaviours that we say, that's fantastic, love it, do more of it. And there are the behaviours that we say, that's not so good, we don't want it here. And they, from a teacher, might be walking into a staff room and speaking ill of a student who isn't behaving well. It may be from a parent deciding that they're going to come down to school and thump on the principal's door and desk every time their child is called to account for their behaviour. And for a student, there could be any number of behaviours that they might be doing, these poor little cherubs with unfinished brains, and as well, coping sometimes with the issues associated with trauma or physiological or environmental challenges. The likelihood of them demonstrating only encourageable behaviours, highly unlikely. There's always going to be some things we're putting up with because we haven't perhaps found the skill, the will, or the time in order to be able to do something effectively about that. So what I want to put to you today is that having that working definition of culture is one thing. Okay, so let's recap that. culture is a behavioural total consisting of behaviours that we encourage and that we tolerate. And if we've got that in place, that working definition in place, we can start to make choices about what we're going to do in order to get the culture that we're looking for. So culture choice number one for me is very clear. So we have in the middle here two sets of behaviours that comprise our culture: behaviours we encourage and behaviours we tolerate. Okay? And you can move up or down from this position of awareness. Awareness is awesome. It's great to know what sort of a culture you have. It's great to think about what are the behaviours we're encouraging and that we have normalised and habitualised. And it's great to think about what are the behaviours that we've got going on that we'd rather not have going on. There's a brave honesty in being able to do that without judgment. And it gives you a clear and wonderful starting point of awareness. But awareness is a bit of a so what piece as well. I get frustrated when we talk about bullying, and every time a young person takes their life in our country, somebody wants to start a foundation to raise awareness about bullying. I don't know if there's anyone here who's unaware in this presentation today that we have a challenge on our hands with bullying in Australian schools. Then speak now, and I'll talk to you later on, because you're an outlier. Most people are very aware we've got a challenge. The awareness isn't the problem. The awareness isn't the challenge. The challenge is, what do we do next? So what? Now what? Is the question that we need to ask. And what do we do? Now, the habitualised response that we have in our schools these days is to step up this model, which means we go to program. And what we do is we formalise our cultural endeavours. We formalise it through the purchase of a program. We formalise it through artefacts such as signs on walls, as I mentioned, around rock concerts. We formalise it through explicit teaching, such as the security guard, in this case being a teacher, standing in front of the room and explicitly teaching the students about things like respect, responsibility and empathy. And I would contend to you that we should have learned by now that our programmatised approaches, no matter how well marketed they are, no matter how many of them decide that the flavour of the month lately is to use the word positive to convince you that you can build positive behaviour in kids by explicitly teaching them or putting artefacts on the wall, that none of them have been particularly successful. And I want you to think, if you can for a moment, and I won't name them because, to be really honest, there's some inherently good stuff in nearly all of these programs. They're well-intended, and there's nothing that breaks kids in them. In fact, that it helps kids build some sort of awareness most of the time, but I don't think it changes the behaviour that we're looking for them to demonstrate when we're not looking. And so what I want you to think about is, what were the behaviour programs that were getting a run in schools, let's say 8 to 10 years ago? And I want to ask you, where are they now? So what happens is that there's a cycle that happens, and it's because these programs are built on hypothetical constructs, and the construct is not about getting behaviour to improve in your school. It's about getting schools to buy the program. I'm really sorry about that, but there's a drain on our budgets that we can avoid if we say, you know what, I don't need another behaviour management program. I had one 8 to 10 years ago, and I'm not buying one so that it can go through the pike and eventually be forgotten as well. So the choice that we need to make is to step away from this notion that we need to step up to program where we outsource our responsibilities around culture, around creating an environment where certain behaviours are normalised. And what we want to do is instead take that responsibility ourselves, which means we need to choose a methodology. We need to choose a way of conducting ourselves around the school with some sort of consistency, such that kids are more likely to demonstrate behaviours that we can encourage, and a little less likely to demonstrate behaviours that we tolerate. And you know what we may do? We have already decided well in advance what it is that we're going to do, so that we can, in a time-effective way, address that with absolute consistency. And as a result, one at a time, move behaviours over from the tolerate pile over to the encourage pile. It's a really important philosophical shift here. But you know what? Sometimes you've got to begin this journey with the end in mind. And if my beginning point is that I am going to take responsibility for the culture of my school by choosing a methodology, as people who know me will be very aware, I think that the best and the most time efficient and also effective methodology that you can use in your school is restorative practices. I won't bang on too much about that today. But what I love about restorative practices is that it's a methodology that we can all learn and we can all adhere to. There's consistency inherent in this model, and it's not dependent on the sort of artifacts that are programs that the programs will espouse that you do. Let me throw one more rock at programs. I would contend to you that most of us choose programs because programs know something about us that we haven't yet become aware about, and that is that we are obsessed with progress. So we like, as school leaders, the notion that we will be able to tick off that we taught this many mini lessons, that we got this many online modules completed, that we got our PD days done, that we've got our signs on the wall, that we have matrices that are aspirational and they design all the behaviours that we wish to see, despite the fact that they can always only describe a very small amount of behaviours that exist in a school. We love ticking off the fact that we've gotten through some of that work. We have to ask ourselves, we've got to think about the 2 kids in your school that drive you the most crazy. And what we've got to do is imagine looking out a window at the end of the day and seeing them cross the oval at your school as they begin to walk home. We've got to imagine them getting to a road. We've got to imagine them how they traverse that tricky road together. We've got to imagine them getting to a park on the other side of that road to a dusty track that winds its way out of your sight. We've got to ask ourselves, is the influence of what they did at school that day a positive one or a negative one in terms of the way they behave when they don't know that they're being watched? That's our cultural challenge. And that's one that, I certainly believe that every teacher has the skills, but just need the focus to be able to get there. Now, when it comes to defining what that culture is all about, I mentioned we need to have some sort of focus within each of those stakeholder groups. These little pictures I'm going to share with you today are actually postcards. So we use these when we are running training in schools as part of the schools, the partnerships that we run to help schools build and establish and sustain these cultures. And the thing that we bang on about is that we are informal in nature. And what we mean is that we're saying that if we change the behaviours down here that we're encouraging and tolerating, we get a different culture. So it's about getting your hands dirty. It's about getting down and into the nitty gritty of what's happening in the line at your canteen when the students are getting their lunch. It's about what happens when they're having a chat with the crossing attendant out the front of the school when the school day is about to begin. It's about how they greet their teachers. It's about how we meet. And the reason I love this card around committed teachers is because this is a group of Italian teachers that you can see on the card. And there are some small, informal, yet habitualised, and funnily enough, quite profound differences about the way these Italian teachers are doing what we might call a PLC meeting and the way that most schools do PLC meetings. Let me tell you what I think they are. First of all, they're meeting in a circle. So the architecture of this meeting tells us that a hierarchy in power isn't important. It tells us that the dialogue is the product here, not the delivery of information that could have been sent out as an email. It's very difficult to tell from this architecture who the leader is in this group. And in fact, I think another subtle difference in this group is that there's no table. So it's not about producing something as the intention of getting together. The intention here is to discuss. And this is what committed teachers genuinely do. We've made a mistake around commitment in our schools. And what we've done is we've convinced people that they need to demonstrate their commitment through time and effort. Here's what I would tell you. I work with dozens of schools all the way around Australia. And I've met with system leaders and visited schools all over the world. I haven't found one yet that I've walked away from and thought, what the problem is there? Their teachers just aren't working long enough or working hard enough. Yeah, we think that that's how we've got to demonstrate commitment. I've fallen for it. I often tell the story of Nick, who, when I was a brand new principal of a brand new school, I didn't know Nick very well. We were in Darwin in the Northern Territory. Things are hot in Darwin. And so we began our school day at 8 o'clock in the morning to get a lot of the work done. The kids would go home at 2:30, 2:40 in the afternoon, and so that they weren't too tired and wrung out by the heat by the end of the day. And I was the principal, and I was somehow convinced myself that I needed to be seen as the most committed, most determined, most dedicated member on staff, perhaps by virtue of the fact that I was the highest paid staff member. Yet every day I arrived at school, I would pull my car into the car park and I would see Nick's car and I would see the light on in Nick's classroom. I actually found myself setting my alarm clock 5 minutes earlier every day so that I could try and beat Nick to school so that he would know I was more committed than him. Our psychology as human beings sometimes, hey? One day I arrived at school just before 6 a.m. Nick's car was there and Nick's light was on, so I walked into his classroom, and there was Nick standing there in the middle of the classroom with a bowl of Nutrigrain in his hand, in a pair of boxer shorts and a singlet. He had a television on one end of the room with the Sunrise program coming on, and he had his Facebook account open on the school's interactive whiteboard. I thought, this is odd. I walked in and I said, "G'day, Nick." And he went, "Oh, g'day, boss. You're here early?" So I know, mate. "So you, what are you doing here?" I said, "It's not even 6 o'clock. He goes, "It's my favourite time of the day." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "If you think that I'm staying at home every morning for the fight that he's trying to get my 2 teenage sons to school every day," he said, "you've got another thing coming." He said, "I've outsourced that problem to my wife." You won't be shocked at Nick's current marital status. And I left and walked back to my office and said, "What's going on here?" Here I was thinking I perhaps had the most dedicated, committed teacher in the whole of the Northern Territory on my hands, and all I've got is the guy that doesn't like his family very much. We've got our definitions around commitment wrong. Committed teachers are teachers who sit in this type of environment that you can see on the screen here. And they talk about practice. They talk about mistakes. They talk about learnings. They talk about awakenings. And they talk about commitments to your whole school's endeavour and commitments to the approaches around well-being and around pedagogy that you have in your school and how they can do it better. It's not a delivery model. It's a discussional model. And when you, as a leader, are structured enough, are formal enough to make sure that these kinds of informal conversations around practice happen, and where people are learning and sharing their mistakes. We're funny about not being able to share our failures in schools, but it's only through dialogue that comfort with that failure and the resultant resilience that you're looking for across a staff starts to become one of the things that's a hallmark of your school. Incredibly important to have committed teachers in your school. It's not about time and effort. It's about how often they sit down and talk about the art and craft of great pedagogy. There's another stakeholder group that I want to discuss with you now, and it's our students. And what I want to talk about is how, as one of the cultural artefacts of your school, your students care more as a result of being in your environment. This care level thing's an interesting phenomenon. Wonder how many of you have heard a student this year say, "I don't care," for something. Now, I think that that's partly a linguistic habit, but I think it's also a verbal demonstration of a lack of empathy. But sometimes they genuinely don't care. Now, we as educators can either deal with the fact that our kids have a lower level of care than perhaps generations that have come through before them, with more connection and more responsibility for their actions, or we could do something about it. Now, I contend that we can do both. We can teach kids in the moment, even if they don't have a great level of care, and responsibility, and certainly restorative practices works better when young people care, when their empathy switch is on. But it's also the most effective tool that I've found in order to help those students find and turn on that switch. So we're trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, if you will. We're trying to make sure that our young people, we're tapping into that empathy and allowing them to use it creatively to solve problems together. But we're also trying to use it to get the students to a point where their care levels are elevated. Now, caring about another person takes you through a couple of phases. What it means is, just the ability to care takes you through a couple of phases. The first one's a knowledge phase, and this works incredibly well. And some people tell me that you can't, for instance, use restorative practices with students who are on the autism spectrum, and I get into big fights with them about that because I fervently believe that you can, because I've just far too often seen it happen. And in fact, if those students don't get what we might call cognitive empathy, which means they know, they have a set of rules in their head that might be best described as if-then rules. If I swear at somebody, they might be upset. If I swear at my teacher, there might be a consequence for that. If I were, as a grown-up, to swear at my boss, I may not keep my job very long. So what they don't have is what we would call the next level of empathy, which is intuitive empathy. So they're not able to perhaps pick it up as well from a facial expression that you might have said something wrong. I know that when I am running workshops, I'm often saying to people that I can kind of tell if I've dropped, as I did today, dropped the magic word early in this presentation. What happens is that I can sort of see someone at the corner of my eye. I can see that someone's not happy that I've made that choice. And I may choose to do something about it. It's intuitive. They didn't tell me they were upset, but my intuition told me that they were. Now, young people who are on the spectrum may not, or they will get to varying degrees of that intuitive empathy, and some very little at all. But they can get the if-then set. So what happens then is they can move beyond cognitive empathy to into intuitive empathy. And for most of our students, they can do intuitive empathy. They can start to learn the way their behaviour is affecting other people and what they need to do. And what we can do then is take them into what we call active empathy, which means that they get to practice the art of doing something about it. They get to fix things. They get to, and once they start to do something about it, for instance, if a student in your classroom drops a drink on the floor, we could argue forever about whose fault it was. You were running. No, I wasn't. I was walking. You bumped into me, and you bumped into me because you were running. I wasn't running. I never run in the classroom. And we can have a really long investigation about this without mopping it up. Or we could get the students to say, what's the problem here? And the problem here is we've got a mess on the floor. What should we do about it? We should mop it up. And very quickly, we get ourselves into a position where we're able to thank and congratulate the students for doing the right thing. When they get to be thanked and congratulated for repairing a mess that happens relationally, then we are accelerating their ability to move from cognitive empathy through intuitive empathy and up to active empathy. And then you can know they start to make choices for themselves. Empathy is the wedge. Empathy is the wedge between impulse and action. It means that when a student is tempted to do something to another person that may impact them negatively, and they don't do it, it's usually because they had a moment where empathy said, might not be smart. There will be some damage as a result of you choosing this. Relational damage. You're not going to feel good about it. You're going to have work to do if you choose this path. We just need them to have that half a second where they think before they act. Doesn't that sound like an exciting concept? An entire cohort of students across your school thinking before they act. And then, of course, we have another cohort that we need to harness here, because let's be honest, our parents and our carers, when it comes to our cultural ambitions, are either going to be rowing, they're either rowers or they're anchors. And we want to have far more rowers than we do anchors in your school. My contention to you is that the homeschool relationship has deteriorated quicker in the last 20 or 30 years in schools than it ever has before. And I think it's evident in the regard that people have for our teachers these days. You know, most people tell me that they're concerned about the status of our teachers, and that's borne out in the statistics that we see around even things like assaults against teachers, but certainly about the regard that we have for teachers. I'm going to talk to you later on about a book I've written about this called Restoring Teaching, which has two ambitions. It's about, one, restoring the respect levels for our teachers in our schools, and two, it's about using restorative practices to get there. But let's talk about that first notion of restoring respect. What we want to do to be respected, the work that we have to do at a school level to get that to happen again, is to stand loudly and proudly in our expertise. We need to start shouting from the rooftops the things that we are amazingly good at. And they can be small, but they are things that other people don't get. And we need to make sure they do. If this period of online learning, of remote learning, has done anything, it has given our parents out there a glimpse behind the curtain. They've had a chance to see exactly what it might look like, only in a skewed and totally, contextually different environment. They've had a peek at what teachers really do. And there's a lot of people out there at the moment that have a little bit of goodwill for teachers. We need to leverage that by beginning to tell them more about the things that they didn't know about teaching. I had a fabulous conversation last year with a leadership team of the school. We were talking about what they were going to put in their newsletter. And there was a paragraph there that they were arguing about and used the word pedagogy. And I argued, one of the APs, they said, we can't use the word pedagogy because nobody knows what it means. I said, well, where would you go to find out? You go to a teacher. You go to a school leader if you wanted to know that. We need to position ourselves as experts. When you go to a doctor's surgery, you sit there and you wait. I mean, what other profession says we are so important that you will wait even if you're the first person, even if you're the first appointment of the day? When you get into a doctor's surgery, you'll often sit there for 2 or 3 minutes before the doctor enters the room. and you'll be sitting on a chair with its back to the wall, and you'll be staring at a wall with qualifications on it. They want you to have a moment. This is by design. They want you to have a moment where you go, the person walking into this room is an expert. I probably shouldn't argue when they tell me that I need a blood test, because that would be a waste of their time. I'll just do what I'm told because they're an expert. I trust their expertise. One of the problems we have as teachers and as school leaders is that through, to be really honest, a media-led campaign which has slowly eroded trust by pumping stories into lounge rooms every night that you shouldn't trust teachers and school leaders. By the way, the flip of that is that they're sending messages to teachers and school leaders also that not to trust families, because look at these nutters that I found throwing rocks at their neighbour's roof at 1:30 in the morning and sold the footage to a current affair for $5,000. That's a rabbit hole I won't go any further down. But the trust has eroded through the presence of those stories. And the way that we can build trust again is to position ourselves as genuine pedagogical experts. What are we experts on? We're the experts on teaching and learning, and we need to talk about it, even in language that they don't understand, because they've got a place to go if they want to find out. And we also want to be able to show that we're experts in the way that you build citizens. And the way you do it is by some of the previous stuff that I talked about. It's about igniting empathy and care levels in people so that when they come into this environment, they learn collaboratively, they cooperate. And when things go wrong, we have clear and productive patterns for fixing it up, for cleaning the mess up in such a way that as the leaders of that culture, because every staff member in your school is a leader of culture, we spend more time thanking and congratulating people for taking responsibility than we do trying to drag them kicking and screaming towards that responsibility. Really important stuff. Now, let me dwell for just a little moment here on restorative practices as that methodology, just in case you're from I've heard things about restorative practices. I would say what you've heard about is restorative practices 1.0, where we do things like, perhaps we, get some question cards out and ask students certain questions if they do the wrong thing. And it seems to always lead to the students going, and then walking off and then doing exactly the same thing again. Perhaps you heard something about using a circle or running a formal conference or something if a kid gets suspended. It's not enough. It's not enough. And so what we've done is developed an approach that we're calling RP 2.0, where what you're able to do is to get a really artful combination of using the right language in schools, because to be really honest, when we're talking about culture and defining culture as that behavioural set, the biggest influence on that culture is the language that's used by the leaders. It's not the program you buy. It's the words you use and how you use them. And if we can take a distinct focus on what those words are and use them in the restorative model, what we call affective language, as a habitualised, routine hallmark of the way that we speak in our schools, then we dip our kids every single day in a culture that says you should be caring about other people. If we then go across to our conduct and we say to ourselves, what is it about our pedagogy? What is it about our practice? What is it about our architecture? What is it about our processes when students make mistakes or they find themselves in some sort of relational conflict? What is it about our conduct in that situation that's influencing student conduct? If we can ask ourselves that question and come up with some decent pedagogical and philosophical responses to that, then we can start to contribute again to that fantastic culture. And the third piece is the mindset piece, which is about saying, what is it about some of those tricks of the past that I've spoken about today? Even this stuff around program, I wonder how many of you have thought about program that way. Or has it been somehow habitually drummed into you that the responses to culture and conduct and behaviour are always about program? Because there are about 9,000 anti-bullying programs out there. That's true, global count, around 9,000. One of them should have worked. Yet what our response again is always just to develop another program based on some sort of hypothetical construct. What if we said one of the mindsets that I'm going to take is this is not a programmatized imperative. This is a cultural imperative. And our job is to say, what are the small little things that we could do that reflect a new mindset? Perhaps a mindset might be to leave the adversarial model alone, leave it behind. Perhaps it might be to abandon your attachment to outcome. Can I blow your mind for a moment here when it comes to mindset? When it comes to mindset in the classroom, my mindset is that I approach every outcome with curiosity, not judgment, which means I don't know what's going to happen. My job as a teacher is not to feel good or bad if a student has a good or a bad experience in my classroom. My job is just to put as many of the small conditions in place that the chances of success were high. They had a shot. That I gave every student in my class a chance at being successful. Some days they will, some days they won't. But when I run a fantastic restorative learning circle on the floor and one kid still wigs out, I don't think that they've done something wrong. But if that kid wigs out and I spent 15 minutes in front of them in an authoritarian position trying to explain how you add fractions, then I might go, I can give that kid a chance. So I reflect on process. And I never judge based on outcome. Some days, here's the truth, some days you can teach a lesson and suck, and the kids will let you off the hook and still do the right thing. And some days, I can be fantastic in the classroom, and the kid still blows up. There's a bit of luck in teaching, and I'm not going to judge myself based on the luck of whether a kid had a good day or an experience or not, but I am going to be intentional. I'm going to be relentless about, did I give my kids the chance to succeed? That's a mindset. And it's a mindset that allows me not to feel bad if the students don't have a great experience. Stay in our cortex state where I can think straight and reflect and plan, and get out of what we call a limbic state where I'm emotional and beating myself up, or perhaps blaming someone else like a school leader who I might say isn't supporting me. Heard that one before. And to actually get out of the productive behaviours that come after I think that way. RP 2.0 is a combination of a pedagogical shift in your school, a philosophical shift in your school, and an incredibly practical shift in your school. And if we can make multitudes of small changes with that in mind, we are going to build the culture that you're looking for. And when you do, you have a chance of having some really fantastic and incredible stuff happen. If you would like to do that, one of the things that you can do is have a look in the, you can go to the chat box that's here today. I know that I've sort of hit you today with a video tutorial by intention, but there is the chance to do a little bit of interacting or to ask for some more information here. Now, if you do head to the chat box, you will be able to access around our school partnerships. So if you want to have a conversation about how we could partner with your school, this is the way we do it. It's on the screen here. All these little bits and pieces that what we bring to you. We actually have a pretty fierce determination. Some people come to these sessions and they say, oh, wouldn't mind getting some PD for our school. And I'll save you the trouble. The answer is no. We won't provide PD for your school. We won't come in the way that a program might and take your budget and take your applause and then leave. But if you're interested in doing something about this cultural work together, you can work with us across a period of 3 years where you will have a proven and successful school principal who will work with you across that period, yes, providing all the professional learning, but also working in classrooms with your teachers, getting your parents on board. I ran a parent session last night for 100 parents at Toorak Primary School. It was fabulous to get them on board. All of them got access to a member section and took away the slides from from the deck so that they could share it with their partners. It was just so awesome. We mentor you to build the implementation plans. We coach your teachers to get past any implementation issues they might have. We do all stuff like articles and videos and ebooks and webinars like this, and we provide it all to you along the way. Survey tools to measure our effectiveness as we go. If that sounds like something you'd like to explore for your school, if you would, in the chat box, just put the word partner and just make sure that it's coming to us as panelists. So there's a little option there for you to put panelists. And if you put the word partner in there, then we'll follow up and we'll have a chat. We'll have a chat and see what we can do to help you with that. I feel like I may have pressed that button twice there, and there'll be some sort of lag here that will make it difficult. Let's see how we go, hey? If that also sounds like it might be interesting to you, but you want to know more than me sort of summarising it across 30 seconds or so, our Associate Director, Simon Dewar, is running a webinar about this on, Simon's jumped in and provided the registration link there. He's running a webinar that's specifically around this partnership approach. And he's doing that on Friday. There's a registration link there in the chat box. And you can use that link to register for that. It's not like a conceptual thing on Friday. He's going to unpack exactly what happens in partnership, share some stories with you about schools that have been in partnership, If you're a school leader who's thinking 2021 could be this thing for me, then please make sure that you jump in there. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate that. I also have been committed to running, I think I missed a slide there. Let me see if I can do the backtrack thing. I'll see if it works for me. I thought I might have done a double click there at one stage. It's just unfortunately when we're using this little software, there it is. I'm running a webinar next Wednesday. I'm doing them every Wednesday at the moment and alternating between webinars for teachers and for school leaders. Today, quite obviously, for school leaders who are interested in cultivating the right culture in their school. Next week is for teachers, and it's for teachers who are battling with one particular student. It's a pointy end. Maybe it's more than one. If you want to know a really practical approach to building an individual behaviour plan that won't end up as just a clogger on a shelf or in a server, that will actually help you to be able to get and make progress with the students who are the hardest to work with, then please register your teachers for this one. Really delighted to put something in your hands. It'll come with not only the instructions, but it'll come with a PDF guide that they can use and take away, and a Word, just a Microsoft Word template that they can use to be able to build their IBPs as well. So make sure that you get people involved in that one. All right, let me see where I'm at now with my slides. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that I wrote a book on this notion of restoring teaching, to elevate respect levels and to do it via these restorative approaches. So if you head to realschools.com.au and look at the book tab, you can even head to my personal website, adamvoigt.com.au. And you'll see the book tab, and underneath there you'll be able to see where you can go and get yourself a copy of Restoring Teaching. We've had some pretty outrageous responses to it, actually. I've been a little overwhelmed by it, but I think that could be a real benefit to you as well. And a quote from that I wanted to use to kind of finish the webinar today, and that is that I've written here that the language used by those who lead in the culture tells those who grow in it what's most important. The words you use are a vote for the culture that you are building at that time. And so if you were to remember only one small thing from today, it would be that your words, when you're speaking with people in your culture as a school leader, matter more than you think. Every single adult who works in a school or school community can consider themselves a leader of culture. So partly this is why our partnerships are so inclusive. Every grown-up in your school is a leader of culture. You, as a school leader, if you're on the school's exec, you get to choose things like programs. Yeah, and if you choose it, it happens, and that's fine. And that works well for a lot of areas, maths and literacy and science. When it comes to culture, your responsibility goes from being high to flattening, and it's shared by all of the other adults in your school. And I just would love it if you would keep that in mind moving forward. Hey, I reckon we're about done. So if there's anything else that you would like to chat about, we are Zoom experts now. So get in touch, send an email to info@realschools.com.au, give us a call. We're really happy to have a yarn with you about what's going on with your school, and we're happy to do it without obligation too. So this doesn't need to lead to us working together, but if we can help you, then we're keen to have a chat and see what we can do. So please reach out. Okay, I think that's us. I'll let you off the hook there. I'm going to hang around for just a few minutes. So if you want to use the chat box, thank you, Marina. Appreciate that. If you want to use the chat box just to make a comment or to ask a question, then feel free. Other than that, you're free to go. I'll see you next time.